Okay, good evening. Welcome back to Kilat Chaverim, Yerushalayim Yerakodesh. And today's shir is being sponsored by Ilu Neshmas, Mordechai Yosef and Dov Pesach. They all that we learn, Ilu Nishmaso, the people here who knew him and heard him. Okay, the Sfas Emes asks a fascinating question. It's one of my favorite pieces. And he says, Be'inyan Shmo Shel Yitzchak al Shem Hatzchok. On the topic of Yitzchak's name being about laughter. Okay, now let's zoom out for a second. We're in the Parshas of the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and we know that the Avos are associated with midos, with attributes. Avram, Chesed. Yitzchak is Gevura, Din, Yirah, Pachad. Okay, Yaakov Avinu refers to him as Pachad Yitzchak. So those are all like one line, this idea of fear and awe. Gevura, which is the idea of holding back, controlling, limiting. And the din, right, which again means that everything has to be according to the justice, so to speak, the way that it has to be. Now, if we were to associate somebody's name with those midos, we wouldn't come up with a name that roughly translates as chuckles. Okay, that's basically Yitzchak. And it's not just tzchok, Yitzchak, right, will bring laughter, will laugh. And this was not a name given to him because they had a name after great uncle Yitzchak. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, B'karas Shmo Yitzchak, you will call his name Yitzchak. And Sari Meinu also said, Kol HaShomea Yitzchak li, because of the great joy of his birth. And that brought about, at the time of his birth, it says many women became pregnant who weren't able to before, many sick people were healed. There was laughter and joy in the world. But how does that fit together with the midah? So this is the pathway that the Sfas Emes takes us on. He says, Shamati mipi Mari Zakeni Zal. I heard from my grandfather Chidush Yorim. He says, we can try to, as the British say, suss it out by looking at another strange use of laughter. It says about Yishmael, the description of Yishmael, who was a Rasha at that point. They say at the end of his days he did tshuva, and hence we had tzaddikim named Rabbi Yishmael. Don't do it to your kid nowadays, but it was indeed a legitimate Jewish name. So it says, Shenema al harosha mitzachek. Okay, so let's step back and see where that's happening in the Parsha. It says that Sarah Imenu saw Yishmael mitzachek. Yishmael was laughing. And she tells Avram Avinu, Lo yirash ben ha'ama im b'ni im Yitzchak. He's got to go. He cannot inherit together with my son Yitzchak. So we look at the psukim and we think, Sarah Imenu, like, can't you relax? He's laughing. What's the big deal? So Rashi brings down from Chazal, what is mitzachek? She saw that he had already done the three great averos of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shvichus Damim. Idolatry, forbidden relations, and murder. So now we can understand Sari Imenu, but it's hard to understand the pasuk. Why would you use mitzachek, laughing, as a code word for idolatry, murder, and forbidden relations? Those aren't funny. Don't come and say, want to hear something funny? What? Murder. Not funny. It just, why would you use mitzachek as that word for it? So the Chidush Yorim explained that the tzchok is that which enabled Yishmael to do this. Okay? Again, setting the scene. We tend to see characters as these kind of stereotyped black and white. Yishmael as this, terrorist person or something like this. Yishmael grew up in Avram Avinu's home. That's quite a place to grow up. And you have to ask, how was Yishmael able to do those things growing up in Avram Avinu's home? Let's take perhaps the most blatant example, Avodah Zarah. There's nothing that Avram Avinu stood against in his life more than idolatry. He was the one who brought the message of the one creator to the world, right? The midrashim of him smashing the idols. How in the world could Yishmael do Avodah Zarah? Especially because there are interesting midrashim later in life of how Yishmael really did have honor for Avram Avinu. He really, so how could a person do it? The Chidush Harim says the answer is tzchok. The answer is laughter. He says laughter can enable a person to view avonos chamurim ki tzchok be'enov. If you turn something into a joke, the most serious things, all red lines can be crossed. Okay? This is the power of it. Now the Mesilas Yesharim, when he talks about the negative form of tzchok, okay, and I don't want anybody getting depressed now because we are going to be talking about the positive side of laughter as it goes on, okay, and that's where Yitzchak comes in. But in the negative side, so the Mesilas Yesharim talks about how laughter and its negative form, which is called leitzonus, right, scoffing, making fun of things, so those are almost like when a person's drunk. When a person is just laughing and everything's a joke, you can really do anything. Okay, we can think of some different examples where you see that. Little kids, right? You have a bunch of little kids at home. It's a rainy day. They've been cooped up too much. And I don't know, the mother says, I'm just going to the store for a second. Here's some markers. Everybody draw pictures till I come home. Okay, she steps out. Meanwhile, one kid draws on his brother's face, right? He draws on his brother's stomach. They all start drawing on the walls. She walks in, and she sees graffiti art and, war paint on all of her kids. She drops the groceries. She says, what were you thinking? Answer is they weren't. Okay, if you would have interviewed them, do you think your mother will appreciate this artwork? No, right? But when you're laughing, you're not thinking. Okay, it just kind of numbs it. You just don't get it. Now, if you want to look at, other examples, even from the world of the children that are more serious, is let's take a playground where many bad things happen sometime. You see that one kid was getting picked on, and one kid knocks him down, and another one kicks him, and the kid's crying, and these boys are laughing as they pick on him. Now you look at them, you think, are these kids psychopaths? But if you would meet them in another setting, they would seem to be normal kids from normative families. So how can they be laughing while this boy is crying? The answer is, because they're laughing, they're able to do it. It bounces off. It's all Teflon. Okay, so that is a power of laughter, very powerful. Even the physical aspect of laughter, we hardly ever pay attention to what a strange thing laughter is. Imagine a person who came from some kind of country where nobody laughed. And he sees someone tell a joke, and suddenly everybody starts making these weird noises and movements, and everybody has their own tone of laughter, the deep ha, the yee, and moving around, and sometimes if it's really funny, tears are rolling out of the eyes, and you can't understand that physical reaction. It's not something a person's consciously doing. So what they say is it represents that in your internal world, things are shifting and changing. Okay, the things which were understood or standard are no longer there. So that's how avonos chamurim can be kischok beinov. And he quotes the pasuk in Mishlei, schok l'ksil osezimo, that it's a joke for a fool to be involved in forbidden relations. Right? Thank you. Right? It's just laughter for him. Again, what that means is a forbidden relationship is something serious. Right? How do people cross the line? In Pirkei Avos, they also formulated tzchok v'kalos rosh margilin as ha'adam le'erva. Joking around, you have two people, they're both married to other people. How can they cross that line? Flirtation, joking, a little joke, a little this, and suddenly all red lines are crossed. Okay, so tzchok can be an enabler, tzchok can be an immunizer, so to speak, and that is the power that Yishmael had. Okay, now he says, the Chidush Harim, let's go back and transfer it back to Yitzchak and see how that mixes with his midas hadin. He says it fits. Kain lehepech ba'atzadik Yitzchak Avinu olav hashalom. Said to Yitzchak Avinu, how you call tachbulei hayetzer hara kischok. All of the tricks of the yetzer hara that usually are very difficult for us, he says, la'adam acher har gavoa, he says, that was just a tzchok. For him, it was a joke. Right? All these tests and temptations and intimidations the Yetzer Hara brings to us, Yitzchak just laughs and says, why in the world would I want to do that? Right? It's awesome. Right? You got to be crazy. And he laughs in the face of the Yetzer Hara. Okay? Now, the midah of Yira, Sfarim say, relates to the idea of Re'iyah, of seeing. When a person has the midah of fear and awe in the right way, so they're seeing things very clearly. Same letters, Re'iyah and Yirah. Yitzchak's clarity and ability to see, right, made those things not happen. I don't know, the strange mashal that came up in my mind for this is the following. Let's imagine a guy who grew up in a small town someplace in the Midwest in America, and he is now going to be the quarterback of his team in the Super Bowl, right, the next morning. So he is all ready, he's in his hotel room, it's 9 p.m., and he's in his pajamas getting ready to sleep because he wants to rest up and be at his best tomorrow. There's the Super Bowl. And suddenly there's a knock on his door in his hotel room, and it's his old friend Vern from Hiccup, Iowa or something, and he says, hey man, I heard you were going to be in the Super Bowl. I came to see you. I brought a bottle of, like, that cheap whiskey we used to drink outside Mr. Jones' store, so we could, like, get plastered tonight together. And I just laughed. Vern, are you crazy? I'm going to be in the Super Bowl tomorrow, quarterback. If we win, my picture will be on the cereal boxes, right? Endorsements, all these things. If I lose, total shame. Do you, in your wildest dream, imagine I was going to drink? Is this like some kind of thing you're filming? You just laugh at it. Now, why is that there? Because he has such clarity about the importance of what he's involved in and what the stakes are, that anything that would mess with that has just got to be a joke. I cannot take that seriously. That was the laughter of Yitzchak Avinu. The clarity that he had from that midah of Yira, the pure sight that enabled him to see the world as it truly is, let him laugh off any of the things of the Yetzer Hara. Now here the Sfas Emes goes out on a limb. He uses the phrase, he says, V'yitochen lomar. V'yitochen lomar means I don't have a source for this, but it makes sense. He says, it could very well be, that even though Yitzchak not just had embodied the midah of yira and pachad, of fear, it could very well be that if you met him in the street, all you would see on his face is happiness and joy. That's what you would see. Okay, now there are two ways that you can review this. It's known that Bali Musar, who was it? Risol Salanter was walking with a friend once in Aser Simei Tshuva, and his friend was looking like really, really tense and intense. And he said, what's wrong with you? He says, Ima Sadin, fear of the judgment, it's Aser Simei Tshuva. Risol Salanter told him, he says, yeah, but your face is Rishus Harabim. Your face is a public property. Other people don't have to suffer from your Ima Sadin. It's not pleasant to look at you like that. Okay, so they emphasized very much being conscious of how other people feel when they see your face and making sure that it gives them a good feeling. Here I think he's talking about it being not something consciously decided to put on, but that was actually the way Yitzchak was. That he was an extremely happy person, even more happy. He says, do the math. Ki be'emes ein mi sheyismach ba'olam rak shu yarei Hashem la'amito ve'en lo shum pachad acher. What gets us down? What gets us down? Why are we so sad and grumpy and down? Because we're afraid of so many things in the world. And there are scary things in the world. I'm not even talking about huge global things in our own personal life. Anything from my bank balance, right, to what the doctor says about your cholesterol, to what's happening with your kids in school, to what's going to be with... It's all very frightening and very heavy. And he says, if a person has true Yiras Hashem, and he realizes that Hashem is in control of the entire world, and the purpose of this world is for the purpose that Hashem created it, he says he has no fear other than the fear of Hashem. That's the fear that there is. And therefore, he's able to enjoy life. It's a strange concept to absorb, but that's the way he describes it. He says, certainly, Yitzchak Avinu even took it to another level. He says, Yitzchak, he had freed himself of the Yetzer Hara because he was muchan la'olah lifnei Hashem. He was prepared to be a korban olah for Hashem. He was ready for it. He said, okay, Hashem gave me my life. Hashem decides to take the life now. I'm in. He says, this ability to do what Hashem wants, no matter what the cost, he says, the greater joy for a tzaddik, more than a rasha enjoys the meaningless things of this world. So that reminded me of a story. It was one of the Karliner Rebbe's that one of his Hasidim came running over to him. He said, Rebbe, the Paretz has gone crazy. He said, what's the Paretz doing? He says, it's summer now, right? He says, yeah. He said, the Paretz told his servants to buy wagon loads of sugar and pour it on the hill outside his house, and he's sledding in the sugar. So the Rebbe made this motion of like this, like bittul, he says. What does the Paretz know? He says, when I put my talis over my head Shabbos morning and say Nishmas, I have more pleasure than he could ever imagine. Right? Meaning, it's a different world. It's a different type of simcha. It's a powerful, deeper simcha. Okay, now he says it could very well be that Yishmael, he says, Rotza li damus elav b'vchinas hasimcha. Yishmael was jealous of Yitzchak's simcha. And he wanted to also be exuding joy and happiness in his life. But he went to the wrong places to get it. And he used it in the wrong way. And Sarah Imenu Yoda Lahafish, she was able to know the difference between Yishmael's laugh and Yitzchak's laugh. And therefore she said, Lo Yirash im b'ni im Yitzchak. Why the double lashon? She had one son. It's not necessary to say im Yitzchak if she says im b'ni. Says, with my son, who's Yitzchak, who represents the midah of laughter. And he is supposed to be the one who brings this laughter into the world, and therefore you cannot have the other type of laughter there. So this shows us uses of laughter, the negative use and the positive use, and its power, as well as the idea that the midah of yira and gvura can combine with simcha just as the midah of ava can. Right? It can and should and fosters it. Now, it's important to realize, and we'll be digressing a bit now into the world of stories just because this is so important. Many people think that the more serious you get about your Judaism, the less you laugh, the less you smile, right? The less it's pleasant to be around you, right? People probably know, you see around the streets here Rabbi Benji Levine, the grandson of Rabbi Levine. He runs a lot of tours in these things. So I once heard him say, he said that he comes from a very illustrious family. Right? Rabbi Levine was his grandfather. That means Rabbi Yoshiv Zatzal was his uncle. He says, I was around many very big people. He said, and they were all very funny. He says, I used to walk home with Rabbi Yoshiv from the Beis Din every day. He had a great sense of humor. And it hurts me when I see young people getting serious about their Yiddishkeit now, and they get this look on their face like they're suffering intestinal pain. He said, like, he said, that's not the way it's supposed to be, right? That's not, it's something you're supposed to learn, to have shimush from these big people, to see, right, that idea of the humor. There was somebody I knew when I was in New York, I didn't get to see it. He was a Talmud of Rav Hutner, that's Rosh Yeshiva Chaim Berlin for many years. He kept a special notebook just filled with Rav Hutner's jokes, right? He had a very sharp sense of humor. And there was one famous one, even at the end of his life, right? Which again shows the power. That's usually not a time that a person can laugh. One person usually loses their kind of sense of humor at the end of life. So he was in the hospital, and it was really near the end. And a nurse came to ask him if he was comfortable. So in Hebrew, the way you say it, that is, Harav, ha'im noach lecha. Are you comfortable? So he said to the person with him, he said it in Yiddish, he said, right? She's asking about Noach. I'm already on Lech Lecha, meaning it's already time for me to go. Right? So the ability to have these, to have the humor and to do it and to know the power of it is a very big key. Okay, now before we go on to more examples from Poland and the world of the Ger Hasidim, I would like to bring a couple things from the Chazon Ish, whose yahrzeit is tonight. Okay, the Chazon Ish of Avram Yishayahu Karelitz, by normal standards in the world, had a really rough life. Okay, he was very poor. He was not healthy in many ways physically, right? He was often very weak, and he fought against that weakness in all of his learning. A Rav I know said that this can be mentioned publicly now because it's so well known. His wife was not mentally well, and that made things very unpleasant sometimes at home and difficult. He never had children, and he was very poor. He lived in this little hut in Bnei Brak. He was known, he had a gray coat, the rekel, but it was originally black when he got it. It's just, he never got another one, and the color faded in the Bnei Brak sun, and that was it. And what he did was learn with all of his strength, with all of his concentration, intensely, to the extent that they say that even to understand his Sfarim is already something that you have to really be able to go and to dive into. And he revealed things that others weren't able to reveal and to see, and at the same time was so caring and let everybody troop through his tiny, basically one-room hut for Eitzah and for Bracha and for all things. And he writes in a letter, it's one of his famous quotes. There were a lot of letters he wrote personally to different people who were close to him. He says, Chazak b'Torah v'kinyaneha, right? Strengthen yourself in the Torah and all the things you can acquire with it. And you should feel good about the wisdom you gain. Okay, this is already an important point, because so many people think that to be frum you have to keep putting yourself down. Right? You learned something. Oh yeah, but it's really nothing. It's the most superficial, external level of anything which is there. It's really, almost worthless. No, you just learned a piece of Torah. Enjoy it. Yes, you know that there's much more deeper levels. There always will be, even to the greatest of people. But enjoy what you have. Let your heart rejoice in the delight of Torah. Enjoy it while you have it. And here's the line. V'ikar ha'avoda b'simcha. Says the main avoda has to be with simcha. Or the main point, the root of avoda has to be with simcha. Ki be'emes ein kol etzev b'olam. There is no sadness in the world. For a person who has got to see the light of the lights of truth. I don't know what that double light is doing in there, but he didn't write anything random. So, first of all, right, it is important to play defense, that the emphasis on simcha is not simply for the world of Hasidim. Right? It's something which is for everybody. Chazon Ish, right, he was from Lithuania throughout. He had many close ksharim with many Hasidic Rebbes. The Beis Yisrael used to visit him regularly, I think almost once a month. Many people, they had Hasidic Talmidim, but he was certainly in that Lithuanian vein, and he spoke about simcha, and that being the main point, the main basis of avoda. And he says it should happen naturally, because if you see things with that light, as we said with Yitzchak, the midah of Yira is re'iyah, there is no sadness. There is no reason to be sad. And this is from a man who lived a life that people looking from the outside would have thought in many ways was very sad. He was always besimcha, and he transmitted that simcha which is there. There's one more story that I saw that I think is important. All this should be Lili Nishmasa. Yankel Galinsky. Yankel Galinsky was a Nevardiker. He was a Talmud of the Nevardik yeshivas in Europe. Nevardik, Alter of Nevardik, of Yosef Yozel Horowitz, was a student of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and they really went on a campaign to open up yeshivas across Europe, and they'd opened many before the war. And he was in a yeshiva where the Russian government insisted that 20 boys be sent to Siberia. Okay, and he and 20 other friends from there were sent off to Siberia for hard labor. And what was there, that actually saved their lives, quite possibly. At the time, it was viewed as a huge tragedy, but it probably saved their lives. He had many adventures in Siberia, which he would tell over. But then, when he finally got out of Siberia, and he tried to find out what happened to his family, so he discovered that there was no family. No one was around anymore. He made it to Israel, and he fell into depression. It was hard for him to have will to live. So somebody told him to go to the Chazon Ish. So he went and he spoke to the Chazon Ish openly. And the Chazon Ish told him the following story. He said there was a case in Europe of a man who used to do trade in, one of these markets. In Europe, a lot of times the wholesale trade went on in a market, in a fair, right? They would call it the Yerid. It was a famous, Leipzig, always they talked about these different places where you would go to buy and sell and bring back. So a certain man who used to go, and it was very important for his livelihood to go to that market every year, and he fell sick. So he told his wife, right, Chensha, whatever her name was, she says, we need this. There's no way. You have to take the stuff to the marketplace. You have to go, you have to sell, you have to get us new merchandise. I can't do it. So he gave her a bundle of money, and she went. Now when she finally walked into the marketplace, she had never seen anything like it. The crowds of people and the yelling and the pushing, and there were animals and cows and geese and who knows what. And she got dizzy and she fell down. Eventually she made her way up and she said, okay, I have to do this. And she went and she asked around where the merchants that have the types of things she wants. She did her bargaining, and then when it came time to pay, she reached into her bag. The money wasn't there. It must have fallen when she fell down, and it wasn't there. She started to scream. She was inconsolable. It's gone. I've lost it. And as people are gathering around her as she's screaming and crying, one man said, oh, you know what? I saw a guy pick up a bundle from the mud. Right? It was like wrapped up. It was that guy over there. So they go running over, and she says, did you find my money? I have a simon, I have a sign. I wrapped it up in these 2 blue kerchiefs. He says, yeah, I found it. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. He says, but it's mine. She's like, what? He says, yeah. He says, you lost it. I found it. Finders keepers. Right? And the halacha is even like that. So the people were very angry at this man. How dare you do this? And the case went to Rabbi Yitzchak Avinu of Kovna. Rabbi Yitzchak Avinu, great posek. And the man presented his case. He says, Rebbe, listen, I learned this stuff in school already. Okay, this was a town, Sherubo Akum. It was a town that was mostly non-Jews. Okay? So therefore, when she lost the money, she gave up on it. She knew that the chances that somebody would return it to her, right, are next to nil. Right? Any non-Jew who picks it up, he has no concept about Sfas Emes, and therefore she gave up. That's what's called yush. Yush means when you despair and you give up on something, so then it becomes kind of ownerless. Okay? And therefore he says, it's mine. So Yitzchak Avinu said, give her back the money. He says, what? How can you ignore the halacha? He said, the problem is you're ignorant. Okay, because in the letter of Jewish law, this woman's money is really in the domain of her husband. And her husband didn't give up on the money. He didn't even know it was lost. Okay, you have to give it back. That was that story in the Psak. That's what the Chazon Ish told Rabbi Yankel Galinsky in his despair. And he said to him, do you see what that story is telling us? He says, your life isn't yours. Hashem created you. Hashem put you in this world. And as long as you're alive, that means He hasn't given up on you. He has something for you to do, so you can't give up on yourself. Ein yush b'olam klal, I always attribute it to Breslov, but Chazon Ish said the similar thing as well. Right? There is no yush, and as he said, for a person who sees that light, there's no etziv. Now, in the little bit of time we have, I want to speak about someone who was a chassid of the Sfas Emes' son. His name was Rav Godel Eisner. Okay, the name God, out of the different shvatim, somehow you don't meet too many people called God. Lots of Ruvens, lots of Yehudas, very few Gods. But he was one. So in the Polish pronunciation, they called him Gudel. He was in the camps for a long time. Some of the Polish Jews went in at the beginning of the war, and he managed to survive for almost 4 years in the camps. Now, part of what helped him survive and what he used to help other people survive was humor. And he explained that this was something he learned already when he was young. He says, as a young Ger Chassid in Poland, we all tried to attach ourselves to find an old Chassid from the previous generation whom we could learn from. I had such an old Chassid. He had even been to Kotsk, he said, and I stuck with him and tried to learn with him. So he said, I'll give you an example. He said, one year we went to Ger for Yom Kippur. Now people who do these tours of Poland heard that there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Ger Hasidim, but when you come to Ger, the shul isn't that big. So what happened? He says, on Yom Kippur, only the older people would go inside. They opened the windows and doors, and everyone else would daven outside. So we got what we call a stancia, we got a place to stay. And then on the night of Kol Nidre, I helped this man walk very slowly to the shul. We got inside the shul because he was very elderly and I was his assistant. But then it started to pour rain outside. As the rain was pouring down, everybody tried to push into the shul. And the pressure got terrible. And the old man said to me, he says, I can't bear it. So I used my elbows, right, and I got him out of the shul. And we started walking slowly in the pouring rain back to the house where we were staying. He said it was a real rain, right? We weren't even halfway there and we were soaked through to the gatkas, like you say. And we got to the house and we tried to open the door. It was locked. We knocked on the door, but we already knew it was pointless because everybody went out to shul. It was the night of Kol Nidre, and they didn't give us a key. So I told the old man, I'm going to try to find another way in. I'll go around the back. So he went around back, and he found that there was a window he was able to open, and he climbed in, right? He yelled out to the man. He couldn't open from the inside either. The door was locked from the inside with no key. He said, come around to the back. I'll help you through the window. Now, this old man was not that flexible and sprightly, and he was a bit more stout than Reb Gudel, and he was trying to schlep him in, and he got stuck midway. So he said half of him was inside the house dripping, half of him was still outside the house getting rained on. And he said, we looked at each other, we just burst out laughing. He says, so it was a terrible Kol Nidre night. He said, but at least we kept our sense of humor. And he says, I learned, I believe it was from that man himself, he said, the famous story that went back to the Koznitzer Rebbe. The Koznitzer Maggid Rebbe Yisrael of Koznitz was once traveling someplace and he saw a bunch of Jews, this big hullabaloo by a river on a bridge, and he said, what's going on? They said, this man fell into the river and we can't get to him, and he's trying to swim back, but the current's too strong. And the Koznitzer Maggid looked over and the Jew was there like trying to fight it, and he said, Rebbe, ich kann nicht. He said, Rebbe, I can't. So he said to him, if so, right, he said, Gris me the Liv Yosan, say hi to the Liv Yosan to me, right, meaning the great, sea creature under the sea. And the man like paused a second and he laughed and then he swam with great strength and made it to the shore. So the Maggid said to the people around him, that's what the pasuk means, ki b'simcha teitzeu. With simcha you can get out of your tzaros. Right, that it can break the despair, it can break the depression, it can give strength. Now this is something, again, is recognized now in the world. They originally called it medical clowning, now they call it medical humor therapy, to make it a bit more fancy. But it's something that we knew for a long time, that idea of being able to make a person laugh, being able to get a person to snap out of it, even for a little bit of time, can bring health and can bring strength. I'll finish with, there were quite a few things he would do to keep fellow inmates' spirits up. One time he told some Gerach Hasidim who were there, he says, after the war we're going to be out of practice. He said, what are you talking about? He says, remember how Gerach Hasidim used to walk in Lodz, Shabbos after the chont, right? You kind of stick your thumbs in your gartel and you roll down the street like this. He says, we're not going to be able to do that. We got to practice. And, they had no beards, no payas, no flesh. They were skeletons in these things that he had them marching around the camp, like doing those things. And there was one very powerful story that someone else wrote in his memoirs. He said that he was in the camp and he was very ill. He had terrible stomach pains. So he was lying down on the board you were supposed to sleep on at night. And he started moaning out of pain. So he said, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I looked up, it was Gudel Eisner. And he said, what's wrong? So I told him, I said, I want to die. So he said, okay, die, but quietly. He said, Yiddish, keep it down. And I said to him, I said, listen, I want to die, but God doesn't let me. He says, you're saying something good now. He says that it says in Pirkei Avos, Al korchacha ata chai, you live against your will. Al korchacha ata mes, you die against your will. And he said, again, I started moaning from pain. And he said to me, listen, these other guys got to get up for work. It's not the last thing you want to do with your life is to keep them up at night, so they're going to be tired tomorrow morning. Keep it down. And he said, against my will, I started laughing. And he said to me, tell me now what you want. And I said, I want to live. He says, and with that laughter, he took me over the bridge from death to life. And he kept giving me doses and helped me survive the war. So it's a very powerful thing, but it requires the right outlook and the right development and following in the footsteps of Yitzchak to be able to do that, right? And to be able to see, but it's something valuable, it's a gift, and it's something that the greatest people do and have. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu put things to laugh at in the world, to laugh with, not to laugh at, right? Again, not the cruel laughter that's sometimes out there, but this joyful laughter which is there that can be healthy and can be helpful. That's how it goes through, and that's a true picture, both from the world of the Hasidim of Ger, from the world of the Chazon Ish, right, whose yahrzeit is tonight. May Hashem help us be able to be besimcha, to be mesameach other people, and to have no yush. Wonderful.